Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Flight. It's great to see you all or be able to communicate with you. This lecture will be a brief discussion on segmentation criteria. So, as we begin to break up a larger market, a mass market or an undifferentiated market, we want to select certain criteria to be able to break that market up into smaller subsets which will ultimately be called target markets. These criteria that we use, though, would be things that we can measure, but things that have some meaningful impact on regrouping consumers so that the subsequent groups of consumers that we have, the market segments, that they behave in a similar way in reaction to our marketing efforts and to our product and service. We can then, after we break the mass market into smaller market segments, we can target them, we can evaluate them, and we can do some really fun strategic marketing with them. So that's what this is all about. We want to talk about the different criteria that we can use in order to break up a mass market into smaller market segments. All right, so enjoy. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, and we'll see you again real soon. All right. So we're going to begin by talking about the idea of segmentation criteria, or sometimes we call these bases. So like a base or a element that we're using to kind of divide something up. Marketers, we want to regroup consumers by identifying variables that help us determine whether customers will like or they'll react to our product or our marketing efforts. So segmentation bases then are factors or criteria used to regroup consumers. There are a number of different types of these criteria. You're probably familiar with some of these, but we have things called demographic, geographic, and behavioral criteria. Keep in mind that these criteria tend to be very easy to measure compared to psychological demographic or segmentation bases. So psychological ones happen inside the mind, and we'll talk about what some of those are. Demographic, geographic, and behavioral segmentation bases are things that we can observe fairly easily or be able to gather that type of information fairly well. Um, Not all segmentation tools, however, are equal. Please bear in mind that when we deal with psychological measures, even though they are harder to measure, they tend to be much better indicators of actual behavior. So things like personality and lifestyles and values and things like that are psychological, and they really indicate maybe a motivation behind a behavior, and those are beneficial. When we combine psychological or psychological criteria with behavior, then we get even better results. We really begin to understand how that customer is thinking. So this category down here is a real good area to be able to understand motivations. This area up here, these are traditionally used a lot from segmentation, but they really don't describe why somebody behaves. They really just reflect what groups of consumers kind of look like from a descriptive statistics standpoint, but they really don't explain behavior. So these down here in this lower quadrant are better. These are good. These are good. These up here are less effective in terms of explaining behavior. So we want to just keep that in mind, that not all segmentation tools are equally effective. Which brings us into what are some of these demographic or what are some of these segmentation tools. So we'll talk about demographic, and these are probably fairly familiar to you. If you can think of a way to describe a consumer, a lot of times we're talking about a demographic base. So age, education, occupation, income, race, size of family, gender. Those are all good demographic bases. Social class and generation group, like age cohorts, while they're listed as demographic on this graphic here, this chart here, they may also indicate elements of decision making. So you might also consider those maybe psychographic but in nature. But typically, these are very easy to measure, like on a survey, something along those lines. They typically do not reflect motivations of behavior, but they do help organize, categorize, and then ultimately, if you think of descriptive research, these are very good indicators or things we use for descriptive research. Behavioral bases are a little bit more complicated, a little bit more challenging in nature. We talk about habits and how often somebody buys, the volume in which they buy or use the service. We talk about loyalty and products purchased. Now, loyalty, again, you could categorize that as a personality trait. So you may throw that one into the psychographic category. Typically, though, these are also easy to measure. However, this time, instead of by surveying people, we may observe them. So use some type of observation. Again, they typically don't reflect why somebody behaved, but they do reflect behavior. So this is actually, they're better than demographic data, because they're actually showing what we call revealed preferences, but they don't also necessarily tell why they behaved a certain way. It just says that they did. So this concept called revealed preferences is one that you may not be familiar with, but revealed preferences is data or actions that somebody does. So they reveal their behavior because they do it. The opposite or the differing kind of preference here is something called a stated preference. Sometimes we talk about revealed versus stated preferences. Stated preferences are something like a survey where you ask somebody if they plan to buy a product. If they plan to buy a product, then they're stating that that they're going to buy. If you actually see them buy the product, then they're revealing their behavior. So revealed behavior is generally much better than stated behavior because it's something that actually happens. If you can imagine on a survey or imagine a situation where we ask people if they're going to buy our new product and we have 80% of the people say, oh yeah, we'll buy your new product. But then when you actually launch the product, only 50% of those people actually do buy the product. What we're seeing is that some people said they would do it, but they really, when push comes to shove and they actually, are required to put money into it or whatnot, they don't do it. They don't follow through. Talk is sometimes cheaper than action. And so that's what we find here. Revealed preferences are much better. That leads us up to the psychological basis for evaluating the market and the market segment here. So psychological bases then, we deal with all kinds of things, all happening inside the mind. Personality, attitude, awareness, needs and wants, reference groups or affiliations and communities that people are a part of, their general personality traits again or other traits, beliefs, lifestyles, Maslow's hierarchy with aspiration, self-image. All of these are good psychological bases to measure. Typically, though, these are very difficult to measure, very difficult to be able to identify without a very good survey technique or an interview of some type. They do, however, reflect motivations for behavior. They may be better because they provide a deeper understanding about the person and how the person is behaving and things of that things of that nature. Right? So very good reasons to use psychological bases as an element to move forward in. And again, as I mentioned here, typically they hard to measure. They reflect motivations for behavior and good things to move forward with. A tool you're may be familiar with. If you're not, it's handy to think of the values and lifestyle scale. So there are measures that help us understand how consumers think about their purchases and their abilities to achieve. And the VALS scale, VALS, values and lifestyle scales, mark people into 8 different categories, from survivors to innovators. We have thinkers, believers, achievers, strivers, experiencers, and makers. This is a product that's actually developed and used. So Strategic Business Insights is the company that developed and uses this. It's based on the idea that self-expression, ideals, achievement, and achievement determine consumers and brand and product preferences and their orientation towards that. If we look a little deeper into the VALS, typology and the psychographic elements of it, you can see that these innovators, thinkers, believers, and so forth, they have certain characteristics. So, for instance, the median age of, say, strivers is 28 and experiences are 24. I guess we'll go with that because it's the smallest. The median age of survivors, however, is 70. So you think about like the psychological makeup of some of these groups, they have demographic criteria, which again we could use to segment the market, but these tend to talk more about why people behave and how they make their choices, as opposed to just kind of reflective elements like these demographic things here. So this is a good idea. This is a good way to think about, if we're going to segment markets, think about how our consumers or clients, how they think and how they feel and their personality. Try to group your consumers that way if possible. So as a summary then, and as we wrap this up, we want to identify and recall that many different segmentation bases exist. Our job is to select the ones that will create well-defined market segments. But we know that not all segmentation bases or criteria here are equal. Psychological and behavioral ones are the best. Demographic and geographical ones are good for organizing and categorizing and describing, but not necessarily explaining behavior. The very last element here we talked about was the VALS scale. So VALS, again, the VALS scale is a tool that's used. It's actually a survey or a questionnaire that can be administered in order for us to be able to segment our markets most effectively. Okay, so that's it. It was fairly straightforward and just a summary of the different types of criteria we can use to segment markets with. Please reach out to me. I hope you've had a good time listening through this and taking notes, studying hard. Anyways, again, touch base if you have any questions. Until then, have a great day.